So it is an absolute pleasure to welcome Mark Halpern back to Leverage. I don't think there's a better person to have on to talk about estate planning. And this episode is really to, go through the 101s and the basics of estate planning. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, wait a second, like I'm not old enough, or am I, or I don't even know what estate planning is. And so I again personally, Mark's background in his childhood as well as professionally, what drove him to get into the business. I couldn't think of a better person to have on and to give us that the lens of what to do best in estate planning. Welcome back to Leverage, Mark.
Thank you, Rachel. It's so great to be back, and thank you for having me back. I always tell people when they say they come to our house and they say, we really had a good time. Thank you. I said, we don't believe you until you come back a second time. So the fact that you're having me back a second time makes me feel really good.
I love that. I'm going to remember that. All those people who said they had a great time and then they're like, I'm
And they
so
never came
sorry,
back.
we're
Yeah,
busy.
no, I didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that it's very interesting for me. Like I've got a bunch of questions also because I have a very well thought out, meticulous plan when listing properties, and so I have very much been a listing agent. I get referred a ton of business based on the efficiency of my process. And it's very hands-on. And for that reason, I get referred a lot of estate sales because you've got families who are either not in town or, there's always a lot to deal with. And so we come in and we do donations, we do decluttering, we do garbage pickup, we do all of that. I literally actually have to say that I had the most absolute pleasure this year of selling the house of a survivor and having the honor of going through all of her items and just being able to donate certain things to Gamachs and making sure that they were in the right hands and not just going to, the porch to be picked up by anybody was a real honor. And I really do think that sometimes, not sometimes, but they are very emotional. Selling a house is very emotional, but estate sales are. But I have also seen them become very complicated. Not to talk a lot, I want to hear from you, but for example, and this is kind of maybe a jump off subject. So we have with dear friends, very, very sad. The mother passed away and her condo needs to be sold. So they engaged me for an appraisal because you need the appraisal of what the property is worth when the person passes away so that when it ends up being sold, you decide whether you have a capital gains or loss. Well, it has to go through probate. And while it goes through probate, they have to keep paying the taxes and the maintenance fees. How does someone avoid that? Whether it's a timely death and expected, all that stuff. Talk to us about how someone avoids probate to be able to have a little bit more control of when and how you may be able to sell that family member's house.
Wow, you know what? We're going to go back 2 steps before we hit that,
Okay, please do.
Because the knee bone's connected to the hip bone, and
Sure.
that question you have is such a great question, but it requires looking at the bigger picture and where this whole idea of probate or ownership fits in, okay? So the first thing that everybody has to have is an up-to-date will, okay? Very, very important. When my father died when I was 11 years of age, I was the youngest of 4 boys. He was a busy engineer. There was no will. There was very little savings. There was no life insurance. It was very hard for us. My mother was 48 at the time, has to go back to work. This is before digital passwords and having to know multiple bank accounts. Life was simpler back then and it was even tough. So
Or
having a
your
will,
mother. How many
yeah,
mothers worked back then? That's a huge change for her, for sure.
exactly, 52 years ago. So so the first thing is to make sure you have a will. And why do you have a will? Because you just want to make sure if a husband and wife, you have a husband and wife, well, largely everything you have is going to roll over to your spouse. On your death or on your spouse's death, it's going to roll over to you. But what happens in the case of a common disaster? There might be some kids, assets. You could have kids that have maybe there's a disabled kid or somebody who might be exposed to divorce situations, or highly, has creditor issues. Like, there's so much. Just make sure you have a will, because the government, they have a formula, and we talked about this last time too, and I think it's just very important. They have a formula. If you don't have a will, and let's just say you're married and you have minor children, so the government says that if you have no will, you die, called intestate, which means you don't have a will. And the formula is the first $300,000 of your net worth goes to your spouse, and the other amount gets split up between your spouse and your children equally. So if you have 3 children, that means your spouse gets 300,000, and then 300,000, then she gets 25% of all your stuff. And your kid's portion gets invested by a public trustee in GICs until they hit 18. And now you've got the government involved. Is that something you want? Absolutely not. So
Government investing in government. How convenient. Uh-huh.
So getting back to the will, so then around probate also is that there are people who have one will, and then there are people who have 2 wills if you have a business.
Can I ask you a question? So, and I don't know how often you come across this, but our very first real estate lawyer, when we bought, no, I did not get asked to write a will when I bought my very first house. I was 23, 24. But when my husband and I bought our second house and we had the kids, he looked at us and said, "Do you have a will?" And we said, "No." Like, I mean, I'm trying to think how old we were, but 30s, 40s, right? At a time where most people would not expect to have a will. Now I can't even remember how old the kids were. Maybe it was younger. And he said, "I'm going to do it for you for free." He goes, "I'm just going to write up a will. We're going to do a basic will. And because if you own a property, you now own an enormous amount of equity in something. You need to have a will." I'm curious, how many real estate lawyers do you think do that? And forget the free part, forget that part. I'm just saying, how many real estate lawyers do you think make that part of their conversation with their clients?
No, they're transactional, and it's all about the transaction, right? Just making sure it's governance compliance, and it's all,
Well, same could be said about real estate agents, but yes, very good point. Maybe
of course, it's
a good
transactional. So again, that's the real estate agent or transactional person of the past. The future is going to be with the problem solvers, not the product pushers. You can't, it's like there's so much going on, like the banks, who really are, John Derringer used to rob banks. They asked him, "Why do you do that?" And he says, "Because that's where the money is." The money is in the banks. So they've got you with credit, and they've got debt, and then they've got a door that opens to this person who does estate planning, this one who doesn't, but you need a team of professionals looking at yourself, because it's gotten much more complex. So really, you do need to have a will. And I'd be surprised if, and I've asked some accountants of this, some very successful accountants, do you know if your top 25 clients have an up-to-date will?
And when you say up to date, you just mean up to date, not that you have to redo your will every 5 years, but is it up to date based on all the changes that have gone on in your life? So
correct. When they took out a will, maybe
right.
They were married to somebody. They were married to somebody else before, right? They didn't have children, right? They sold a business. They set up a holding company, so now there's more sophistication. So it is something. It's a living document that definitely has to be reviewed. I think I've been married now for 30. It's going to be 31 years. I think we've done our will 4 times. 4 times.
I was just thinking. I was like, when was the last time Eddie and I did our will? We really should probably do that anyway. So yeah. So what did the accountants say? Of their top 20, what did they know?
They sheepishly said they don't know, and they should. It's something, but let's face it, the accountants are busy. They're very busy. And they're mostly very reactive as opposed to proactive. If you go to them with a problem, they'll fix it beautifully, even with a ribbon around it. But they're not going to come to you and say, "Hey, do you have a will up to date? When was it done? Do you have powers of attorney?" It's just, they're busy, and everybody's got ADD. Plus, your client, when you're an accountant, and this accountant's talking to the client about that, he's like, "Hey, what are you talking about this? I just want you to help me save taxes, or whatever." So that's why it's really important, as I said before, Rachel, you need a team, right? So wills also, you might need to have a primary will and a secondary will. And that's where probate comes in. We talked about probate.
Yeah.
Is
So yeah,
that,
let's get
is
into
that
it.
you can have a will for your personal effects, and then you could have a will for your business effects, which would be operating companies, holding companies, real estate that potentially you own, investment real estate. And the reason for that is in Ontario, it's basically there's a tax that the government charges called probate in Ontario, and it's 1.5% of the market value. That means even if you have your house and it's just in one person's name, like I had this doctor who had all of his assets in his wife's name because he's exposed to litigators, right? So it was all in his wife's name, which is a common way of doing
Very
it,
common.
protect you from creditors and litigation,
Or if you have
whatever.
a huge
And then,
company, it's all,
yeah,
yeah, for
and then
sure.
she died at age 60, like just boom, suddenly,
Oh
and
my God.
she owns everything. So the government wants 1.5% of that. So that estate was worth about $10 million. So it's a $150,000 tax grab. Why? What is it for? It's to protect the estates and the banking world. That when you go into a bank and you say, "Hi, my name's Mark Halpern. I'm the executor of," and they go, "Oh, sure, here's all the money." They can't do that, and they want to see a will. And if this will is there, they have to probate it to make sure that it's official, and that's where this big chunk of change comes from. So if you have a primary and a secondary will, you can avoid that whole probate thing up until the second to die, and then there's other things you can set up bare trusts and whatever. Now that brings us back, Rachel, to your question about probate. I had to go through that, right?
No, it was great, but you know what? I actually have to tell you, I was not aware that there was a probate tax. I understood probate, I understand why it has to happen, but it to me, it's like a land transfer tax grab. Like you, I mean, I had a client who said to me, "What are you talking about land transfer tax?" Meanwhile, he was a trust fund baby, so he had like no idea. And I said, just take it like as simple as I can tell you, it's a cash grab. Don't question it because there's no logic to it. It'll make you crazy. Just move on. You have to pay it. There's nothing you can do about it, you know?
But there are ways around it. So now getting back to your situation, how could you do it where it's not involving getting primary wills and secondary wills? And so one of the ways that we'll do it, and I'll just use my example of my late mother, right? She was a widow, so she put me onto her title on her condominium, such that when she dies, instead of incurring that 1.5% tax, it would just roll over to me as the owner of this property, as without any probate. Now, that sounds fine and good, and it sounds like most people would say, "Yeah, I wanted that. That makes a lot of sense." But you have to know that that asset now becomes part of the other person's estate, which means if I've got a gambling problem, right, or I've got a creditor issue, or I get sued,
They're
that
taking
house of my mommy, my dear mom, is actually one of my assets, and she can get tossed on the street because of my, inability to manage my financial affairs, right? Or in a marriage, hey, I actually own that property. Is that considered part of the marital estate over here? Or the other part is this: because my mother's condo isn't my principal residence. In Canada, if you have a principal residence and it appreciates, there's no taxation. But now suddenly Halpern here has a 50% interest in $1 million, let's say a $500,000 condo that's now gone up to $1 million. Well, guess what? Halpern's got a 50% interest in the gain on that condo, and then there's possibility of capital gains taxes.
So how do you get around that? Because that's an interesting, it feels like a Tetris game. So here I am. No, it does, because you're
I
trying,
like
I
that.
mean,
It's a great analogy.
that's what we're all trying to do, is like that Tetris game of like hitting the mark time wise to avoid the tax without because the government's going to find a way around that. And this is an anti-government conversation, but it's just, okay. So here I am, and I have a dear friend who's much older. She's in her 80s and called me and said, "I need to speak to your financial advisor because, I need a recommendation for putting my son on my, like she had a stroke. She got really like nervous. And she said, okay, I want to put my son on it because God forbid something happens to me, and I have another stroke or something. But then if he's sitting there and God will, like, God love her, she'll probably outlive us all. So she's now going to be around for another 20, 25 years. He's on the hook for the capital gains on her condo for being on title. Does it matter if you're if it's joint tenancy or
The
not?
joint survivorship. So let's just take this step back. So really, this is a
Everybody get a pen
conversation.
and paper out. Like, we got to follow the bouncing ball.
You really have to sit down with your tax advisor, okay? This is not like instant coffee, and I don't want to, there's no prescription here without a diagnosis. They call that malpractice, right? So you have to speak to your accountant. Now, really, what it should be is if I'm on joint name, then really expenses and interest and all that should also 50% should be accruing to me. I just want you to know most people don't do anything about it. They don't report it. They don't, and even then on the sale of the condo, either while mom's alive or at death, and now it accrues, the property is transferring over, most people will not report that. They'll just it's because remember, you had rights to survivorship, so now you just own the condo. You just walk into the condo that you already owned. So again, I'm just saying out loud that I don't think a lot of people are doing it properly and correctly. Could it come back and bite them? Yes, it's a possibility. And there's people who say, well, so bad, so sad, too bad. I'll plead tourist ignorance and I'll deal with it at that time, whatever the repercussions might be. The point that I'm trying to say is speak to somebody first, okay, for your unique situation. And then it could be that you set it up, not because one of the issues also around putting your name on that property, let's say I have 3 older brothers, right, which I do. So what'll happen is if mom goes bye-bye, really I'm holding that property that's supposed to be split 4 ways. But guess what? Now I own the property 100%, and I can say to my brothers, guys, no, mommy wanted me to own the condo. That's why I've been named on it. In other words, that's the law. The law is I can say that. And I can be a scoundrel and walk away with the entire, the whole enchilada because, so who you put on, is it all of those? Is it all the siblings? One, you also have to take into account American. Are you an American, Canadian,
Oh boy,
jurisdiction?
yeah. That gets even
Anyway,
more
then you
complicated.
get
Sure.
so no, like I said, no cookie cutter answer, Rachel. What we're trying to get here is that people should know that there are risks and get help. That's it. That's really the message.
I have another, like, out of left field, but related that you're just now saying it. How does it affect all of these parents? Because let's be honest, a lot of stuff is happening because of mom and dad, like Bank of Mom and Dad, or was happening based on Bank of Mom and Dad. I think some banks of mom and dad got a little overstretched, also, unfortunately. But there were parents of clients of mine that put their name on title and gave money towards a purchase to allow the kids to be able to afford to buy the house. And then what they would do is then later on they would take themselves off title, right? And they were trying to figure out how to do that. What are the tax implications as well? Like, from a standpoint of, like, if you had a client who came to you and said, listen, I want to take some money out. I want to give this to my child, but I also need to go on title for a little while. What are the repercussions of that? Or am I getting, like, completely out of?
Again, I think that would be a great idea for the parents. Again, you're protecting the parents are protecting themselves. It's an investment that they're giving money to. At the same side, they're also protecting potentially their kid and their kid's spouse because there's no matrimonial situation here. They're almost like renters over here. They own the house.
No, matrimonial. Like, it's a daughter. Your daughter's getting married with a husband. They can't afford to qualify by themselves.
So now the parents rightfully own the house, right? So at some point in time, they can take themselves off. They could sell the house to them, come up with some sort of schedule for repayments of the original amount. Or in a lot of cases, parents will sort of just, as part of their estate, forgive it. And hopefully what they'll do is they'll have done that for other kids, or hopefully what they'll do, if they only give it to this kid, they'll now reduce what the
Was on
others
the will.
would be going to that kid and basically equalize things with the other children.
Yes, yes. And if they were on the title with the kids already and then took themselves off, so it looked like they were on an investment property, I guess is their
They
tax.
really do have to. They do have to report that stuff, right? But again, I'm going to guess, Rachel, that a lot of people would not, right?
Ah,
So
gotcha.
those are also the people who deduct their pet food as a business expense for
What?
client gifts, and that sort of stuff. So you can deduct everything until somebody
Hold on,
comes
I gotta
knocking
write
on your
that
door.
one down. I haven't thought of that one.
But really, the other thing about having your by the way, being on title with your elderly parents, right, or your elderly parent is like you better have a good relationship with that kid because guess what? They can kick you out in a flash, throw you on the street. I'm just saying, there are people who hear
No,
terrible stories where
it's
there's
true.
elder abuse and mom's all her checks are coming into rotten son. Kids, she's not getting the help and care she needs just for general hygiene. There's horror stories out there. You got to be very, very careful. That's why they say you should really, really treat your kids really, really good while they're young and getting older. Why? Because they're going to be looking after you in your old age, and you don't want them to be,
The daughters for
the
sure.
daughters for sure the best, for sure they're the best. But those are some of the things. The other thing I wanted to just say, I'll also add in while we're talking about elderly parents and real estate. Besides needing the wills, everyone needs something called powers of attorney, and we each need two of those powers of attorney. One's for personal health care. If I can't take care of myself, who's looking after me? And the other is for personal finance. So they look after all of your banking and as if you're there, but you don't have capacity, which would also mean your real estate, right? So if you have investment real estate, now suddenly that person is the power of estate or power of attorney to be able to do these financial structures, pay the bills, sell real estate, etc. So it's really important to get this stuff identified. What would you like to see happen? Like, in other words, right now the sun's shining, everything's fantastic, but we know, the runway gets smaller or there's an accident. What would you like to see happen if you cannot, take care of yourself, or if God forbid you die? And it's really important because this stuff also, Rachel, like it's in our subconscious if we haven't done it, and it rents space in our brain, and it zaps us of energy whether you like it or not. It's so good, and it's not difficult to get it out of your head. Speak to a professional, get this all done. Remember, you're not locked in for life. You can always adjust your will. You can always change your powers of attorney. You can always do that. But there's a great peace of mind knowing that things are put into their proper place.
It's true, and I would also say on the plus side of it all, I would say you could also be blessed enough to live a very, very, very long life. And so I think, I had a client who was God bless him, like 98 years old and felt his kids were wronging him. And he was like, okay, I'm going to sell the house because I don't want them to get the money. And I was like, okay, well, where do you want to go? Like, you're 98 years old. Like, that's a big move. And he's like, I want to stay here. I want a life lease. And I'm like there's, like the complications in a life lease, like no one does them. It's next to impossible. And so here's this poor man who feels, he's stuck, in a situation. And I think that if you have the ability to have the right professionals around you to make sure that you're protected with things like that, that they don't happen, because it's all great as long as everybody's getting along. I hate to laugh about it, but it's true. And, it's the same for you as it's the same for me, in that I always say my business is not about houses. I don't sell houses. I deal with people's lives. I solve their problems. There's a laugh, like, you're the therapist, you're this, you're that. But the reality is that that's what, all the things that we do on a day-to-day basis are involved in people's, dynamics, for lack
and
of.
and and the most intimate private information they don't just share with anybody. I was saying to you before we started, one of my largest clients died last Thursday, and the funeral was Friday, and the family just got up from Shiva this morning, and I'm with this family, it's a fairly large family, and they said, I was telling them stories, and they said, Mark, you probably knew more about my father than we did, right? Because Dad was a very private person. He didn't talk to his kids about his stuff. He lived a very modest life. And while he was alive, it was his way. And, he was good to his kids. But now, Dad's removed. And there's this, like, what's going to be? A couple of kids are in the business. Is the business still going to be a piggy bank for them? Now the other kids are like, no, Dad's not. We're invited to, and Mom is older, and she still has to be taken care of, and it's not so simple. So it's those times that you realize who's still seething over the fact that their little brother got the larger piece of cake when they were 10 years old. It's like, still upset about that, and now it's payback time, so hopefully it's not that extreme. But Rachel, I've seen siblings spit at each other, suing each other, suing mom, suing mom,
Boy.
you know
I've seen parents sue kids. Oh, like it's so sad.
so that's
It
why
really is. It is.
most of the challenge is because they haven't done planning, and number two is they haven't communicated to the family, which is part of estate planning as well. What is the plan? What does it look like? A lot of times there are kids who are the have-not kids, the kids who buy $10,000 purses, the kids, and they just want to know, like, everything's okay and they're going to be all right. And, part of that is very, gives a lot of people, frees up their mind and gives them a lot of peace as well.
It's true, and I think that if you do these things ahead of time, and again, like we can close the circle on this, here in that um, I'm approached by a lot of people who, need to sell a home. The cost of keeping that home up is a burden, right? But they are legally not able to sell it because it has to go through probate. And so, speaking to someone, as you see, if you have an ailing or an aging parent, you recognize that potentially there's, a burden financially on you, having an honest conversation with a parent and saying, like, listen, I want you to live for another 100 years. But I need us to be prepared because this will affect me, on top of the fact that on the total opposite side of like a piggy bank, you can also inherit your parents' debt. So
Oh, it's so true. They say that, our parents apparently we're going to spend more time taking care of our parents in their old age than they spent time taking care of us in our young age. And that's why, even what I'm speaking about, I'm thinking of your audience being young, people 35 to 60, and I call that young, I'm 64, but I'm just like that age. But yes, they have to take care of what I just mentioned, but their parents have to take care of that all the more so. And the last thing I know, because this has been sort of our estate planning 101, we have, like, this is just part one of estate planning 101. I think we have another segment to do around tax and philanthropy and charity, but everyone should also have what I call an estate directory. And what is that? Like, Rachel, if I asked, if God forbid something happened to Eddie, do you know where all of his stuff is?
yes,
If something happens to Eddie, you know where all your stuff is, right? And what if,
no,
right? Okay. And then what if you have a common disaster? Would your kids know where everything is?
no,
Okay,
no.
look at
I'm
that,
the only
Rachel.
one that knows where anything is.
Well, that's why you have such a great family, because I always say that the family where the wife does all of that is always the most successful. Okay, don't leave it to the
No,
guys.
no, they all just show up.
So Rachel, we've created an estate planning directory. It's a writable PDF, and we just recommend that couples should have a date night with a bottle of wine, fill it out, interview each. We have digital passwords in our brains. Affinity markets that were part of associations. The Bank of Canada has hundreds of $1 millions of money that's never been claimed for people that have moved off. Just fill it all out. Where's the insurance? The key to the safety deposit box? Who's the lawyer? Who's the account? Where are the deeds to the properties? And put it someplace that somebody other than you and your spouse knows its whereabouts at all time. That's it. So it could be
It's
with
like
parents.
having a front door key to your house with a trusted neighbor in case everybody loses it.
And unfortunately, I've seen it in 35 years. I've seen people who,
Oh yeah. Especially older generations where the husband, I mean, I still know people who wives have no idea necessarily. And that's just a personality, a personal choice. That's not a judgment. But I would say more typical of the older generation where like my grandmother had no idea of anything, like zero of what was going on. And because no of her generation, women did not. Right. But I think that now, and I think that what's also very important is that, and again, we talked about this in the first episode, and I'll continue it as a common theme every time we talk, is these are not tips for people who have tons of money. This is not for the wealthy only. If you are someone who has RSPs, even if you just rent, if you have children, if you have a GIC, it doesn't matter. It needs to happen, and it makes it even more pertinent to happen if you do own property. There's no question, hence the full circle of the real estate part of it. But again, we talked to this in our first episode. There are so many young couples that I talked to who are on the fence. They don't know if they should do this, they don't do that. And I said, have you spoken? Forget the mortgage broker. He's just running numbers for you. Forget me. I'm just going to tell you what you can buy. Forget both of us. Have you spoken to a financial advisor? Is this a good idea for you? And so again, you don't have to have tons of money. If you have RSPs, great. That's enough. You want to save, you want to plan, that's what you guys are there for. In the end, you will, and everyone wants to understand how you guys make money. And maybe one episode will do that on how financial advisors do make money, but they will understand that so much of your work is also sitting down and going, I think I told that story in the last episode, like that we went through our expenses the very first time we sat down with a financial planner and said, what's this line item? And my poor husband was shamed because of how much money he was spending on dry cleaning.
Well, he is, and he's a bit of a fashionista, so that would do it.
He's very, oh my God. Anyway,
But that's all good points, and that's why having a financial planner, somebody to help you navigate. You just need to have a team. You need a lawyer. You need an accountant, an insurance person, an investment person, and they got to talk to each other also.
Yes.
And the real estate person, especially somebody like you, Rachel, where you're more of looking at the big picture and you're going to get paid. It doesn't matter. You're going to get paid now, down the road. It doesn't really matter. But as long as if we're not able to help people understand the risks, to help them and motivate them to get things done, then who's going to? And it leaves them in a lurch that they're going to be very much exposed to situations that would not have been their choice, first choice, second choice, third choice, So it's great what we're doing. So I appreciate this, and I think this is a great message. I hope that, the people got something. I really would like to, if you put it on your post, we'll put a link to get that estate directory. Because
that's a great idea. Yeah, send that over to me.
And then people can get it and just, and those also, we also have an executor's duties checklist, which is put it with your wills. Hey, what happens when somebody dies? What do you need to do? What are all the different steps?
Yeah, I can even put it in the link to the bio. And if anybody wants to, from now, so if they don't see the episode, but they'll see it. It's a great tool. I think it's fantastic.
Beautiful. Good.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Rachel, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. May we talk again soon and review all the simchas and wonderful things that are going on in both our lives. And, may we be healthy and happy and only good things.